Imagine spending 30 years building the perfect image, the faith, the family, the wisdom, telling millions of people how love is supposed to work. And then one morning, you wake up, and the entire internet is saying your own house is on fire. That's exactly where Steve Harvey found himself. And what happened next revealed something nobody expected. But before we get there, you need to understand something. Because this story isn't really about a rumor. It's about a man who built his entire empire on one promise. And what happens when that promise starts to crack? Steve Harvey did not become who he is by accident. In the 1990s, he was a different kind of star. Raw, loud, honest in a way that made people uncomfortable and laugh at the same time. Def Comedy Jam, the original kings of comedy. He wasn't polished back then. He was real. And that realness is what people fell in love with first. But at some point, Steve Harvey made a decision. A very deliberate, very calculated decision. He looked at the landscape of American television, and he understood something most comedians never figure out. That the biggest money isn't in making people laugh. It's in making people trust you. So he changed. Slowly. Quietly. He cleaned up the comedy. He stepped into radio. He hosted game shows. He sat across from families every single day on Family Feud and smiled that wide, safe television smile. And America let him right into their living rooms. Then came the book. Act Like a Lady. Think Like a Man, millions of copies. Millions of women reading his words about how men think, how love works, what loyalty really means. Steve Harvey wasn't just a comedian anymore. He was the guy you listened to about your marriage, about your relationship, about your heart. And that is exactly why what happened in August 2023 hit so differently. It didn't start with a press conference. It didn't start with a statement. It started the way everything starts now, with a tweet. A single post from an online personality named Keemstar suggested that Marjorie Harvey, Steve's wife, had been having an affair. Not with a stranger, with someone inside their own home. His personal bodyguard, his private chef. Within hours, it was everywhere. Now think about that for a second, because the speed of what happened next says something very important about who Steve Harvey had become in the public eye. This wasn't just celebrity gossip. If it had been almost any other celebrity, it might have trended for a day and disappeared. But Steve Harvey had spent years telling people how relationships work. He had written the book, literally, on how men behave, what loyalty looks like, what women deserve. So when the rumor hit, the reaction wasn't just shock. It was something closer to disbelief. Almost betrayal. Social media didn't just spread the story. It consumed it. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Every platform turned into a courtroom overnight. And nobody waited for evidence. Nobody waited for facts. Because in 2023, a good story doesn't need proof to go viral. It just needs to feel possible. And here's the uncomfortable truth. To a lot of people, it felt possible. Why? Because they already knew things. They knew about his previous marriages. They knew about the legal battles. They knew that the image of Steve Harvey had been carefully constructed, polished, and maintained for public consumption. And the moment a crack appeared in that image, people rushed toward it. Fans began going back through years of old footage, interviews, red carpet appearances, talk show segments. One clip in particular stopped everyone cold. It came from 2016. Steve and Marjorie were sitting together on his own talk show, right next to Bill and Juliana Rancic, discussing relationships and infidelity. A completely normal segment at the time. But when people rewatched it in 2023 with fresh eyes, something felt different. Steve's posture, the slight lean away from Marjorie, the way his arms stayed crossed, the moments where his eyes didn't quite meet hers. Now, let's be honest with each other. Body language can mean anything. A person shifts in their seat 100 times a day, for 100 different reasons. But once the internet decides it's looking for something, it will find it. Every pause becomes suspicious. Every glance becomes a signal. Every smile becomes a performance. The video spread. Then another. Then another. Content creators were slowing down footage frame by frame, adding dramatic music, writing captions like, "The signs were always there." And millions of people watched, clicked, shared, and decided they already knew the truth. Then Steve Harvey finally spoke. It happened at InvestFest 2023 in Atlanta. A live audience. A moment before his scheduled talk, he stopped, looked at the crowd, and said, "Before I get started, just let me say I'm fine. Marjorie's fine. I don't know what y'all doing, but find something else to do. 'Cause we fine. Lord have mercy." That was it. Those few seconds became one of the most analyzed celebrity responses of the entire year. And people didn't agree on what they meant. Some heard a confident man dismissing nonsense with grace. Others heard something else entirely, a response that was too smooth, too controlled, too rehearsed for a husband reacting to a story this painful. Not a single specific denial, not one direct answer about the bodyguard, not one moment where the mask slipped even slightly. Marjorie posted too. Something about not responding to lies and falsehoods. A carefully worded message that said everything and nothing at the same time. And instead of ending the conversation, both responses made it louder. Here's what most people don't realize about celebrity damage control. The silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. Every word a public figure says in a scandal becomes content, becomes a headline, becomes something to analyze and dissect for weeks. So sometimes the play is to say as little as possible and let the noise die on its own. But that strategy only works when the public isn't already looking for reasons to doubt you. And the public had already started looking long before August 2023, because there was a chapter in Steve Harvey's story that never fully closed. His second marriage, to a woman named Mary Shackelford. Their divorce in 2005 became one of the ugliest legal battles in his personal life. Mary made serious accusations: infidelity, emotional cruelty, financial mistreatment. The details were painful and public, and they never fully disappeared from the internet. Court records told one version of the story. Mary told another. And in 2011, she was actually held in contempt of court for violating a gag order, meaning she kept talking when a judge had legally told her to stop. That's not a small thing. That tells you how much she felt needed to be said. Now fold that history back into 2023, into the rumors, into the response that answered nothing, into the years of relationship advice delivered to millions of people by a man whose own romantic history was this complicated. And you start to understand why so many people felt uneasy, not because they knew the truth, but because they realized they might never have known the full picture at all. And then came Cat Williams. If the cheating rumors were a spark, the Club Shay Shay interview was gasoline. Cat Williams sat down and said what people in comedy circles had whispered for years: that Steve Harvey's early stand-up career wasn't entirely his own, that material had been borrowed, that the foundation of his rise wasn't as self-made as the legend suggested. These weren't small claims. They went straight at the core of everything Harvey had ever said about himself. The grind, the struggle, building it from nothing, being self-made through faith and hard work. Cat Williams wasn't just questioning a few jokes. He was questioning the entire origin story. Other voices joined in. Comedian Mark Curry, actress Angela Means, former peers and industry insiders who had stayed quiet for years suddenly had things to say. And the internet, already primed from the cheating rumors, already deep in its examination of Steve Harvey, didn't let a single word go unnoticed. Steve said nothing, and that silence landed differently than the first one, because this time it wasn't about his marriage. This time it was about whether the man you had trusted to tell you the truth about life had ever been fully honest with you at all. Think about what Steve Harvey sells. Not just entertainment. Trust. Every book, every advice segment, every motivational speech, every time he looked into a camera and told someone how to build a better life. It all rested on the idea that he had done it honestly, the hard way, with God and grit and nothing else. If that foundation shakes, even slightly, the whole structure above it starts to look different. And that's the thing about public figures in the digital age. You can survive a scandal. You can survive a mistake. What is almost impossible to survive is the feeling that people don't actually know who you are, that the version they trusted was a version you constructed, that the warmth, the wisdom, the relatability, all of it was a product just as much as any television show or book deal. Steve Harvey is still on television. His shows still air. His name still carries weight in certain rooms. But something shifted after 2023. You can feel it in comment sections. in the way his old clips now get watched with a slight squint instead of a warm smile, in the quiet but persistent question that follows his name wherever it goes now. Who is the real Steve Harvey? Not the host, not the author, not the relationship expert, not the faith-driven family man, the actual man, the one behind 30 years of the most perfectly maintained public image in American entertainment. Because here's what nobody talks about. The most dangerous thing about building your entire brand on trust is that trust is the one thing you cannot buy back once it's gone. You can apologize for a mistake. Steve Harvey proved that after Miss Universe. You can take the hit, own it publicly, even make it part of your story. The world forgave him almost immediately because the mistake was human, visible, honest. But you cannot apologize your way back from doubt. Doubt doesn't need proof. Doubt doesn't need a verdict. Doubt just needs a reason to exist, and once it does, it changes the lens through which everything else gets seen. The rumors about Marjorie were never proven. No evidence was ever presented. No confirmation ever came. And yet the conversation never fully disappeared. Because the internet doesn't forget. And because Steve Harvey had spent so many years standing on a very specific kind of stage. The stage of the man who has the answers. That the moment people started questioning the stage itself, there was nowhere left to stand that felt completely solid. That's the real story. Not a rumor. Not a tweet. Not a bodyguard or a private chef or a deleted post from an online personality. The real story is about what happens when the image you spent 3 decades building becomes the very thing people use to examine you. When every lesson you taught becomes a question pointed back at you. When the trust you traded on becomes the currency people are now asking to see the receipts for. Steve Harvey at 69 is still standing, still working, still smiling in that way that made America feel like everything was going to be okay. But somewhere behind that smile, there's a man who knows something the rest of us are only beginning to understand. That in the age of the internet, you don't just build a reputation, you build a target. And once the world decides to look closely enough, they will always find something worth talking about.